Hello and welcome to The Interview. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. As the war between Ukraine and Russia rages on, one small Baltic nation has been caught in the crossfire. I'm talking about Lithuania, a country of 2.8 million people known for its high-income economy and quality of life. The war has led to uncertainty about its future, courtesy its history. For 45 years, Lithuania was a part of the Soviet Union. When it became independent, it joined the NATO. And this has led to threats from Russia, especially in recent years. The invasion of Ukraine has amplified those tensions. The president of Lithuania has declared a state of emergency. There have been threats from Moscow. There are fears that it might be the next in line to be invaded. And people in Lithuania, according to reports, are preparing for the worst. Some of them are training, taking up arms against Russia. How real is the possibility of a Russian invasion of Lithuania? What kind of support can it expect from NATO and European Union? And Lithuania, remember, is also the country that recently took on China vis-a-vis Taiwan. How has that impacted its relationship with Europe? To discuss all of this and more, I have a very special guest with me today, the Foreign Minister of Lithuania, Mr. Gabrielius Landsbergis. Mr. Landsbergis, welcome to WION.
Hello.
My first question to you is about the threat perception in Lithuania. You've said in the past that, and I'm quoting, if Putin is not stopped in Ukraine, he will go further. By further, do you mean your own country?
I should start probably about talking about the principle of inviolability of country borders, of country sovereignty and territorial integrity. And obviously, if a big country, a nuclear power, is allowed to cross another country's border and stay there, it obviously changes the whole meaning of a security architecture that was built probably after the Second World War. So that means that if you're allowed to do it once, so what stops you from doing it more times? And there are countries in the vicinity who are, I would say, at risk in this sense. They are in the region. One of them is a country like Moldova. And yesterday there were some events in the breakaway region of Transnistria, which is also in between Ukraine and Moldova, where some activity, probably related to Russian military, was witnessed. But again, the question is, would a border of NATO country would be enough to stop Russian intervention? And there are people in Baltic states who are asking that maybe not.
And there are also reports that Russia has deployed nuclear weapons as a preemptive measure in Kaliningrad Oblast, the westernmost subject of Russia. What is your information? What can you tell us about this?
The information is only, I can tell you what was been told in the public, that we have certain information that Russia is able and in certain cases has deployed measures that it would need to have a nuclear arms in Kaliningrad. That is a very dangerous precedent because, as you can imagine, the Kaliningrad is basically in a territory that is within the European Union. And now we are seeing that Kaliningrad is more and more a military base, a sort of an enclave with Russian troops, planes, tanks, ships, and probably even the nuclear arms within and very, very close to quite a few European and NATO capitals.
Europe has been accused of bankrolling this war for Russia. Are you satisfied with Europe's response so far?
Well, to be honest, I can tell you that probably there are very many people in Russia and in other parts of the world who believe that the Western countries, and especially European countries, would be so united in their response. Before the 24th of February, you would probably hear more about the disagreements and the very, very difficult path towards a consensus when it comes to sanctions, when it comes to common foreign policy response to anything that is happening. And it was always very, very difficult. Now, after the 24th, we've managed not only to secure the 27 around the European table, but also to expand it. And really, when you think about it, the global response to the Russian aggression was unprecedented. And I think that this is the biggest surprise that caught Mr. Putin in his attack, because he was definitely not expecting that.
But to what end? What has this global response or European response achieved? Because the war still goes on and Ukraine is the one that's suffering, and countries like yours feel the threat. And if this is going to be the standard template for response, then it is only going to be condemnation and more sanctions.
No, not necessarily. I can tell you that, for one, yes, the sanctions are very important. They diminish the possibility of waging a long-term war. It means that the resources that Russia would otherwise, or any aggressor would otherwise use in order to wage war that lasts not 3 days, as Mr. Putin expected, or even 2 months, as is now going on. But if we're talking about the war that would last for 1, 2, 3 years, or even longer, it is impossible to do that without very significant resources. Now those resources are being are frozen. What more can be done is that we should ban the imports of oil and gas. Obviously, this is what Lithuania has been asking for, and we are determined to find a consensus on that. And certain announcements from the German government make us believe that we are getting closer to the agreement.
That Europe is going to give up Russian
yes,
gas.
I'm sure that now we are approaching the stage where it becomes a matter of time, not a matter of whether it is at all doable. The second thing is support with arms and lethal equipment. This has also been unprecedented. If you'd expect that countries like United States and United Kingdom would support Ukraine with arms and deliveries, now what we've seen that European Union has made already a third tranche of financial support to buying lethal equipment to Ukraine of 500 million euros, and it totals now in 1.5 billion. And if we listen to the words of High Representative Josep Borrell when he said, we're not stopping there. So if you were to ask a question a year ago, even 2 months ago, that would Europe be in the forefront of supporting Ukraine with arms and equipment, I mean, nobody would have believed you. So this is definitely a new geopolitical reality that we are finding ourselves in. And we are, I would say, we're stepping into big shoes, but it's difficult now to measure the size of a shoe because I think this is the first time that Europe is wearing them.
Yes, in management language, there's a saying that output does not match the outcome. I think that's what's happening. There's a lot that is being done, but the outcome is not necessarily changing.
Well, I would not necessarily agree with you. If we take into the consideration that Mr. Putin expected a 3-day war.
Says who?
Well, it is a lot of intelligence points to that.
Western intelligence.
Well, the only intelligence that we have, unfortunately. And obviously the equipment that Mr. Putin has brought with himself, the people who are not trained, not ready, with no motivation to fight, I think he really expected Ukraine to fall very, very fast. So I can tell you that the outcome has outmatched the input many, many times. And this is truly remarkable. It only happened because of the sheer will of people who are fighting for their freedom and sovereignty.
I'll come back to the Russian gas. Your country was the first in the European Union to abandon Russian gas, and I have some data with me. It says Moscow supplied 63% of Lithuania's oil imports in 2019, and that Lithuania had been preparing for this decoupling for 12 years. How tough was this decision, and how did it come about?
It was quite tough. In 2008, it was probably the time when Lithuania paid the highest price for its gas from Russia. We had only one supplier, that was Gazprom. We had only one pipeline that was owned by Gazprom. And obviously, whenever Russia wanted to put pressure, political pressure, it used gas as a leverage. And for a country like Lithuania, it is a very important decision to make. If we give in to the pressure, if we allow to be pressed, that means that we are abandoning part of our sovereignty from the very beginning. So the government made the decision to abandon the imports via pipeline altogether and start building a LNG terminal, which for a small economy, a small country, it's a significant investment, as you can imagine. We've started building that in 2010. It was built in 4 years, finished in 2014, and since then we're able to import the gas from wherever we want. basically whoever offers the best price in the market. And sometimes it was Russia. But then again, if we believe that Russia is unfairly pricing its gas, then we can just switch it off. The last episode started during the winter, when we started noticing that the war could be imminent, and we wanted to diminish our imports from Russia, so we started looking for another suppliers globally. Nobody else. We were quite alone in the market back then, actively looking for new shipments. We pre-purchased them, and when the time came, we were able to switch it off. So I'm proud to say that due to certain smart political decisions, now we're completely independent from Russian imports.
The rest of Europe, and you just said that they are working on switching off Russian gas, but what has stopped them from doing it so far? Is it the fear of an economic slowdown, or is it also the fear of a Russian retaliation in some form?
I mean, again, you have to look back into the history. I mean, there was so much belief that Russia will be a trustworthy partner, so much belief, and all the examples that we tried to show. Really, I mean, if you can go against one country, small like Lithuania in 2008, what will stop you in the future from not doing the same thing to countries like Germany or Hungary or Austria? And we've been always saying that, look, they will use the same instruments that they are using against us. But back then, I mean, nobody really believed us. They tend to believe that, look, I mean, with enough trade, that the dependency builds on both sides, that Russia is depending on money that it's receiving from the West, and we're depending on gas.
So it was not so much about shared values as much as about trade for Europe?
Absolutely. I would definitely say that. So, but as with time, what we see, that the dependency on us is far much greater. Because when a country, especially a non-democratic country, that can actually, looks at the money that is receiving in a different sense. We can just stop paying salaries for a few months to your population and say, look, I mean, we're at war. Things happen. In democracy, you cannot do that. So that means that the dependency that you're building with a non-democratic country is always bigger on the democratic country. Always.
Would you say Europe is making the same mistake with China now?
I say that there are lessons to be learned from Russia's attack on Ukraine when we're talking about China. I want to stress one thing, and this is a message that I brought with myself here today to New Delhi. First of all, this is not what's happening in Ukraine is not a regional conflict. From a geographical standpoint, it might look very far from India, from Australia, from Japan, from Taiwan, but it's not a regional conflict anymore. It's about the global rules that either we adhere to them, everybody, no matter your size, no matter your regional position in geographic position, or we break them. If we break them in Ukraine, that means that they can be broken elsewhere. Same lessons apply to the dependabilities that we've talked about, energy. Europe has built a lot of dependence on the supply chains from China. Why? Maybe because it's convenient. Maybe because China was the first one to offer good trade routes to Europe. But again, throughout the years, with every passing year, the dependency just keeps on growing. And then you come to the point where you have to ask yourself a question, whether it's still, are we not losing part of our sovereignty because of a dependency? Are we still able to maintain enough space for our foreign policy, for independent foreign policy, with the dependencies that we've grown? And I think that those lessons have to be learned, and examples to be used, and then decisions for the future have to be made now.
Are those lessons being learned? Because there were reports that your country was under immense pressure from Europe when it gave space to Taiwan and the episode with China.
Well, I can tell you that withstood that test, not as a Lithuania, not just as Lithuania, but as Europe. As you know, Europe maintained united position when it comes to sovereign foreign policy decisions. Very clear message was sent to China that it is not okay to bully a small country like Lithuania.
Sent when and where?
It was a political statement agreed by the ministers in Europe. Also, what I would like to add is that it's a very strong statement in practical terms, the WTO case. that was just started after the consultations ended. And to add to that, I mean, that again, I think it is a bit against the expectations of big countries like China and in some cases like Russia, that the united front could be maintained. You expect that other countries would not join a country as small as Lithuania. But when we've seen the consultations that started in the case of Lithuania against China, so first of all, it was the whole European Union that started the consultations. Then they were joined by United States and were joined by Japan, Australia. Basically, the whole G7 countries joined in this matter, so that it shows that when talking about something as global rules-based trade order in this sense, so it's not just about the size of a country, it's about the principle.
Some of what you're telling me is news to me because from what I remember, it's the same European Union that allowed China to edit the so-called friendship letter. It is the European Union that brought to bear a lot of pressure on Lithuania for doing what it was doing and tried to ask Lithuania to tone it down. It is the European Union that sanctions or questions Russia, but at the same time buys oil, which we've discussed, or continues trade with China and becomes part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So then my question is this European Union practicing the values that it preaches?
Well, it's very good that we're having this conversation then. I'm able to explain and certain things.
Inform me.
No, I can tell you that probably, as I mentioned before, as with Russia's war against Ukraine, is a new reality that Europe, and not only Europe, not just Europe. I don't think that there are countries who would expect that their reality would stay the same as it was before the 24th. That it has changed. A global reality has changed, and we all need to find our positions in this new world that is forming, and it won't be answered. How this reality will look like in upcoming days, even in months. But I think that this is already begun. And now we have to take our active part in this.
I also want to talk about Belarus, your immediate neighbor. Lithuania shares a 420-mile-long border with Belarus, but bilateral ties have not really thrived. Is it because of Russia, or is there more to it?
Well, what bilateral ties can you have with a country that is a participant in the war against your friend and ally? Belarus is an active participant of the war.
But that's now.
That is now, but before that, we witnessed a lot of what is called a hybrid activity against us. Last year, almost exactly a year ago, a plane was hijacked that was flying from Athens to Vilnius, and on board it had more than 90 passengers, Lithuanian passengers, as to all other nationalities from Europe and elsewhere, and also one opposition member. And the regime in Minsk decided that they can actually use a falsified bomb threat in order to take a plane down from the air, force it to land in Minsk in order to get their hands on this opposition member. In principle, also taking hostage about more than 120 passengers, other passengers in the plane. So it gives you an idea about the possibility of friendly relationship that you're able to have with a country that is able to do that. And I'm not even talking about what they are doing with their own people, with their opposition. How many people are political prisoners there? The numbers are staggering. The measures that they're taking against opposition is incomprehensible. And to add to that, actually what was a new chapter since last year was that they actively invited people from different countries, and India as well, and Middle East and Northern Africa, to fly into Minsk, offering them a free passage to the European Union via Poland, Lithuania or Latvia. Putting people in miserable conditions, forcing them to stay in the forest with the hope that they will be able to cross the border to European Union with no obstruction, so to say, which is not true because, well, European border is guarded as probably is any other country's border. So we had we called it a hybrid attack. honestly, and we stand by the name that it was organized attempt to change your neighbor's decisions of foreign policy decisions in that case, because we were one of those who advocated for heavy sanctions on Belarus. And then, well, what we began is the war. And so now I could tell you that Lukashenko decided actively, the so-called leader of the country, decided to burn all the bridges that were remaining to Europe and to many other countries who deem themselves a part of a civilized world.
Right, and since you mentioned the refugees, yes, Belarus has been accused of weaponizing refugees,
yes,
as they put it. Lithuania has welcomed 40,000 refugees from the war in Ukraine, and I have some reports that accuse your country of refusing migrants from the Middle East, reports that say that those fleeing Ukraine are, their papers are processed quickly, they're given visas, the ones from Islamic countries face a harsher fate. Your comments on that?
Well, I wouldn't say that it is right to compare the two cases. In one case, in Ukraine, people are fleeing shelling. Mostly it's women with children on their hands that just escaped active bombing.
So was the case in Syria, no?
We don't have Syrian migrants, to be honest. The biggest numbers are from Iraq, from Erbil, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but probably is one of the most safest areas in Iraq. At least there is no bombing there. I visited Iraq.
So is there a rule that says what kind of refugees you take in?
Yes, there is a rule.
Yes. So you're coming from an area that is being shelled, you're welcomed?
You're escaping war and you're trying to get away with your life. Otherwise, if you're seeking better economic life, which is understandable, and I appreciate this sentiment, but there are different rules to enter a country when this is the reason. And to be honest, the thing is that, I worked as a volunteer in a refugee center with Ukrainians. The most heartbreaking thing is that many of them, they tell me that they are here just very temporarily. They want to return to their country and rebuild their country.
I would imagine that no one would want to leave their homes willingly or voluntarily, and they would all want to return to their countries, to a peaceful life.
Well, I would assume that as well. But from what I've heard, also speaking with the migrants who try to cross the border illegally, yes, on a false impression that it is possible to do that. No, the story is very different.
So you're saying that your country is only stopping illegal immigrants and not necessarily refugees of war, and there's no racism there?
I can tell you that there have been quite a lot of permits given to the people who cross the border, even illegally, where we established that the people were fleeing war. I won't give you the exact numbers, not to make it an advertisement, but this is the process. There's a due process. And it's being challenged by the court, not in one level, and it's a European process. But unfortunately, it's countries' sovereign right to decide how many and whom they are accepting under what conditions. Lithuania remains an open country to the people from vulnerable positions, especially those who are fleeing war. But that has to be a very honest request, and in some cases it is not.
All of these, and I dwell on this because Europe came in for a lot of criticism, including your country, and this is not a question of legality, it's a question of morality/ethics, and the fact that there is a certain kind of refugees that Europe is open to accepting. Are all these reports and accusations of racism unfounded, you're saying?
No, in our case, I mean, the thing that we've established is that it has to be a very specific reason. And as you mentioned, there are countries who are, well, to give you one example, that we have about few hundred people from Afghanistan. They were allowed to stay because we understand that they have no conditions to return to. That doesn't mean that they can cross the border easily. Or still illegally try to cross the border and expect to remain in Europe. That's not the case. It will never be. But then again, the conditions from which they arrived are very important.
Mr. Landsbergis, this is your first visit to India, as you just told me, and India and Lithuania share deep cultural ties. The data that I have shows that bilateral trade stands well above $200 million. Where do you see this relationship going, and what are your expectations from India?
Well, I think that this is an excellent opportunity, especially when we're talking, and with what we've been talking before, about the dependencies that Europe has on certain one country. And I think that if we're talking about the diversification of our trade ties and economic ties, I think that India plays a very, very important part. To add to that, with Russia's war against Ukraine, there are many supply chains that are being disrupted when it comes to materials that are needed, that were used to arrive either from Ukraine or through Ukraine. And I think that there are many things that India can offer to European countries, especially in this time of need. The thing is that infrastructure is lacking. We have to invest in that, and I'm very glad that yesterday Commission President Ursula von der Leyen talking with the officials in New Delhi about the increased cooperation, about the new agreements that could be signed between the European Union and India. And I think it's truly one of the steps in this new reality that we are talking about.
Final question: what are your expectations from NATO, and do you think that the NATO cover is enough to safeguard Lithuania's interests vis-a-vis Russia?
Well, Lithuania is NATO, first of all.
Yes.
So when we're talking about, there is no thing that Lithuania and NATO. It's a one umbrella. We defend our allies as well as our allies defend us. So we have a full trust and full trust in Article 5 and in our allies. And to be honest, I would, if not for Article 5, if not for NATO, I think that we would already have faced Russian aggression before.
Right. We hope you don't. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.